I'm like, I don't work in beauty anymore, technically speaking, so I get to look whatever way I want. Psych, cut that out.
Do you see what you have to look forward to if you quit? Okay. Hi, welcome to the Beauty Ritual Podcast. I'm your host, Eva. Here we explore the intersection of age, beauty, and identity in today's world in America and hopefully one day around the world. Today my guest is Kelsey Furlong, a writer and an ex-hairdresser, which is perfect because today's episode is, I'm still debating on the title, if it's I broke up with hairdressing or, tales of an ex-hairdresser or life after hairdressing. But that is what our episode is about today, so thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming out of the mountains.
Oh my God. If only your audience knew, if only you knew what I had to do to get here.
Maybe one day they will, but they don't need to know today.
They don't.
You know?
No.
That's the number one thing in hairdressing,
I'm tired of telling.
Is boundaries. What do you tell people and what do you don't?
That's right.
What do you just don't?
That's right. Do you have boundaries in what you listen to?
What, from my clients?
Yeah. Or you're like, we don't talk about that here?
I used to have no boundaries because I enjoyed the titillation of like learning things that I probably shouldn't. And then I got to the point where I was like, this is affecting me and I want to still be friends with you, right? Like you start to realize where you can continue a relationship and where you can't. So now I'm pretty cognizant of, let's not talk about that.
That's why I asked. Yeah.
It was a journey.
I'm sure.
So you did hair in Columbus, Ohio.
Yes.
That's where you got your license. That's where you got started. And how long did you do it?
Oh, about 5 years. From the time I started beauty school until the time I left the salon and moved then into cosmetics. So I went to school in Columbus, worked at a couple of salons in the area, and it was, for context, this was like 2005 to 2009-10, so like a totally different world, at least by my perception. The industry and our culture and just like the way that we understand, like even the conversation about boundaries that we just had, there was no awareness of that. There was only, you were in a service position and you were providing. Always right. That's right. Client's always right. You are providing this. That's it. You are in a position of service. Mm-hmm. And that meant something different at that time and at that place, right? And I guess, just like, to be clear too, I don't know where the majority of your audience is, but we're here in LA, like it's a totally different world, not only in 2023, but from Midwestern, Columbus, Ohio at the time too.
I mean, sure. I grew up in Michigan.
That's right.
And a lot of people at the time when they heard I wanted to do hair, they always said, why don't you do it here? Why don't you go to school here? Then you can move to LA. Why do you have to make everything so hard? And there was a part of me that just wouldn't let go this idea of LA being the capital of vanity. And that's where I wanted to get all of my knowledge. Because to me, I get that hair is a trade, but I also think that it is an art. And so being around the right artists struck me as important from the beginning.
Totally.
So I always wonder what it would have been like to experience hair in the Midwest, because there are amazing artists. And I think with social media, there's an even playing field because you can find people everywhere that are just as good as LA. You can find them in Arizona and Texas and Michigan. There's always going to be, an artist that is extraordinary.
Totally.
With the internet, it's all at our fingertips. But the journey to getting there is probably very different than it is here in the city.
I would say so. And I mean, so when I was in school and the first probably couple of years that I was going through my assisting and behind the chair, well, definitely while I was in school. And I'm thinking about this for the first time in a really long time, right? So,
is there nostalgia? Like an enjoyableness to it? How do you feel when you think about it?
It brings up a lot of like funky stuff. It wasn't a particularly like lovely time in my life. Well, for a minute it was. And part of that was actually, this is what I was going to bring up, was I was, at least at the time I thought, on this path to get my license, get some experience, get grounded in the industry and the role. And then the plan for the person that was my boyfriend at the time was that we were going to move to LA. And that kind of changed. We ended up staying, and things transpired however they transpired. But it's interesting that you had this perspective of like, no, I want to drop my pin directly into the center of inspiration and industry, at least like the way that I'm, and by the center, I mean the way that you in the moment were like, this feels like the center of this to me, right? It could have been New York, it could have been LA, it could have been Pensacola, Florida, like it doesn't matter. But at the time, right? And we're talking about LA. So, and I was like, as bold as I am, I was very scared. And I think that was a big part of it. So it was like tiptoeing. And just like kind of wrote this story that it would be easier for me if I did it this other way. And ultimately that shaped me and informed me about the industry. And the internet was not the same, right? So I didn't have the perspective. I didn't see things that other parts of the industry were doing that would seem accessible to me. It all seemed very inaccessible. And from my perspective, it looked like I was going to have to work in one city, in one salon for 30 years if I ever wanted to have that like 6-figure, right? As was like the pinnacle of the goal. Like if you can get to a 6-figure business, you're going to be just fine. And
it's funny when you touch on the easy part, like what's easiest for me. I relate to that in a different way because originally my biggest obsession was fashion.
Yeah.
And it was like a very niche taste. I could spend a whole episode describing like my taste at that time in high school, where you're supposed to be choosing what you're going to do. And that was what I was basing my decisions off of, was my taste up to this point in life. And I looked at things like New York, and to me, all I saw was clothes, fashion in what you wear, not so much hair.
Yeah.
And I considered maybe going to fashion school, maybe going there, but if you're someone who is making all of your decisions independently and you don't maybe have backing for school, that's where the ease of hair comes in. And it's part of the reason I chose it is because I knew like I can bootstrap this, right? And I think that for a lot of hairdressers, that's an honest part of the decision, is like, I can do this. I can start it by myself. I can make it happen. And it's not a bad thing. But it's something that's tricky because cheap is not always cheap. It can be expensive. Easy is not always easy. It can be very hard.
Yeah.
And luckily for me, I found that hair was challenging and beauty was challenging because I also found a huge love for skin and makeup. But it wasn't impossible. It wasn't hard. And it was something that led me into a passion for it.
Totally. That's relatable for me. So it was makeup for me. It was always cosmetics. And so when we were looking at potentially moving to LA, I was looking at, the makeup schools, and at this point, their names, and it's irrelevant and they escape me. It doesn't matter.
Well,
but
it's
like
turned
who
over.
the big ones were, right?
Sure.
At the time, and really wanting to do that and getting my license, like going to school, because I wasn't having success at, university and wasn't really interested anyway. And what I mostly wasn't interested in was all the debt because I was paying for it, right?
Right.
And so that's such a valid point. It's the access, and it felt like a stepping stone. And it wasn't hair for me.
So why did you get a license? I know so many brilliant makeup artists who have a mild curiosity about hair, but they're like a cat to water. They're like allergic at the idea of trying to learn anything about hair. And they're amazing.
Yeah.
Brilliant geniuses.
Yeah, you just made a Gemini joke before we started recording, and I am insatiably curious. Like, I want to know a little bit about all the things. And so it was hair as a vehicle to like get into the industry and make some money because I needed to make some money. And makeup at the time and the place that I was at, cosmetics, like, again, it just didn't seem accessible. I didn't have any information about that yet, beyond these like initial searches of like, where could I go to get, can I swear here? Out of here. And
And we're like, yeah, kids.
I'm like, just checking, right? But like, let me
Don't go crazy.
Yeah. Okay.
That was it. You had 2 shots.
Okay, I'll watch it. Good luck to me. So it was like, okay, so I can go to do hair, and I'm also learning about nails here, and just like dipping my toes in, learning about skin. I'm getting all of this, and then the hair can be the vehicle to whatever else beyond that, because it's all I knew and all I kind of understood, and so.
And you're also touching on the fact that all of this is connected. So as much as you may be someone really interested in cosmetics, I think you set yourself up to win by understanding there's a large picture and it all feeds into what you want.
That's right.
So sometimes we think like, I'm just going to specialize and focus on this one thing, and that's what I love. That can be very true, but ultimately you're going to get through that tunnel and it's going to open up into this place where you realize, wait, there's some information that I wanted from other sources that would feed what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
But not that it's ever too late to go back in the game, but now I'm probably gonna have to get that in a different space.
Totally. And I think like,
It's like medical school, if you think about it. Like people go through like the basic training, and then they specialize. I'm a plastic surgeon.
That's right.
I'm an endocrinologist. I'm an ophthalmologist. But you all have the same basic understanding of medicine.
Right. So that you can be informed.
Yes.
About how you want to go forward, and you provide better service for it too.
Yes, you do.
Yes.
Yes, you do. And
So,
I think that most people don't think of beauty in that way because it's so easy to write off beauty as this like silly thing.
And in that way, let me just take that like a little bit deeper, just to be clear.
Yeah.
It's, to me, what I hear in that way, it's holistic, right? It's as like a whole being. I mean, to understand the way hair works with skin and bone structure and color and all of the things. It's even if someone's only sitting in your chair asking you to talk about hair, inevitably other things come up, right?
So
and
true.
It's part of your value as a caretaker, like as we were talking about, what is the role of hairdresser, and it's so many things. It's coach, it's advisor, it's
psychological,
someone that holds boundaries.
Yeah. Confessional a little bit.
Totally. It's mentor in a lot of ways, and you are sitting with and holding space for people in their most, now I'm vulnerable, like in their most vulnerable moment.
Well, if you've been there and you've gotten to experience that, it's the biggest treasure in doing hair. And it's even why I'm doing this podcast.
Totally.
Because these special moments where you get to experience the depth and the wisdom that people have gathered on their path to understanding themselves and their life, you almost want to shout it to the whole salon when it happens because it's gorgeous.
It's so good. Yeah. Yeah, and I really credit that foundation that I got through the experience of cause school, the experience of all of the training that I had to go through, because I went through a really rigorous training at the salon that I went to, and that was another like very intentional choice. Like I knew that I didn't know after, oh, I'm sorry, I failed.
I was joking. You really do have a hall pass, but I like to make threads.
Okay, all right, I'm being mindful.
I like to make threads. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if I just let that hang out there and I didn't address it?
Go.
Just go.
There's the exit.
I'm glad you understand my humor.
I mean, that's why I like you. So I knew that I didn't learn anything in cause school. Like I learned how to pass the state boards.
100%.
Like that's it. You know, I learned about basic sanitation and, you know, basic whatever.
100%.
How to cut a mostly straight line of hair.
It's always debatable at the time, but it's how you sell it afterwards.
Don't tell everybody that. So, but I credit all of that experience and the like fundamentals that I learned through that to my next steps. And then I did have a very successful, you know, tenured executive career in cosmetics and
Tell
as
me
an
about that
artist
transition.
too.
See, okay, part of why I am loving this conversation is because I was so committed and passionate about getting through school and having a career in hair that when I met people who, let's say, were really successful, they had started a product line, but they quit hair, I was like, how dare you? How dare you quit hair? I can't speak with you. And they have this like totally successful like business line in a very saturated market. But my initial idea about people who quit was like, that's it. You just gave up, right?
Yeah.
It's not the case. There's so many opportunities that a license can bring you afterwards. It's amazing.
And we evolve. We grow and we change and we're allowed to explore and like apply those skills and our talents and our gifts that are natural and developed through these experiences to their areas. And it's like you're here, you're behind the chair, you work with your clients and do all of the things that you do, and we're doing this podcast here. Like, who knows where things will lead you? And that's okay. It's encourageable even, because part of the reason that I left hair was because I did not feel like I would have any space or grace or permission to do anything else but that without judgment, without shaming, without like, who do you think you are? What do you think you're doing? Like, this is it. This is who you are. This is your role. And for me, my identity has always been way more multifaceted and complex. And I've spent, and since, you know, age is part of the topic of the podcast here, like, I'll be 39 in a couple months, and that's not old, but I definitely have spent years like learning to let my identity, I guess that's part of it too, evolve and be multifaceted and not feeling like I had to put myself into one role. And you know, that like identity that is also so tied to what we do is a very American thing. Like, what's one of the first questions that someone will ask you in the US if they're American too? Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
And so that's such an interesting thing. And I've worked really hard to not like feel that I have to define myself to have a certain value or to feel a certain status or, you know, just like make my mark in a way that leaves an impression or not. Like, who cares? That's where I've landed. Who cares? I'm here. Like, I have all of these experiences and all of these things that I can offer that I would not have developed had I stayed just in that one role.
Right.
And that's not to say that everybody has to leave to develop themselves.
No.
And that's the point. That's why I love so much what you're doing and what you're about, Eva, because you are representative of that. And it's really beautiful. And that's beauty, right? It's all wrapped in together. Our identity gets to be fluid, and just curiosity lends its way to that. And so
thank you for saying that, because I think when you talk, like, first of all, everything you said like broke a lot of emotion inside of me, because I think it's something we experience from the time that we start to decide what we're going to do. And it's a continual question. the whole time.
Yes.
From that moment in high school when you're trying to figure it out.
There's so much pressure.
There's so much, but like at the very end of everything that you just said, what that was so beautiful is when you were talking about that fluidity of our identity, is why I think it's so important to talk about it is because I feel if we're not really cultivating a wider conversation around it, we can lose some of that fluidity in a market that is sort of pushing us to express ourselves in these really, branded and simplistic ways that, we don't necessarily choose to define ourselves with if we had the breadth to have that choice.
Right.
Which is to say that every choice can be the right one as long as you're really cognizant of choosing it.
Yes, and sometimes we're not cognizant of choosing it, and that's how we learn also. We don't know what we don't know. And so there is also an element of moving into the unknown and being willing to be wrong. Being willing to
I hate that. No, I'm
be
kidding.
vulnerable. Me too. It's like, I mean, it's really, I mean, I am, and have been for a couple of years now in a pretty big transition. My identity has changed, I mean, so much over these last few years, and I so love who I am and who I'm becoming, and I love who I've been mostly. That's like an ever, kind of a work in progress always, but it's
I feel
really
like if you
interesting.
don't look back and hate it a little bit, you haven't grown.
Oh, I totally agree. Like if there's no cringe.
If there's no cringe, you're like, really?
Right.
I mean, sometimes you can look back and be like, oh, I can glean what I'm liking out of it. And I think that is a different layer of maturity and wisdom where you're like, oh, I can kind of track myself. Like whether, since this is a beauty conversation, whether it's through photos and selfies, you're like, wow, I look happy. I'm doing this right. I like my eyebrows, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I do think cringe has a really valid place.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, it can be easy. I've been thinking a lot about this just personally lately. It can also be easy to look back at photos and start to try to like get back to some of those things.
Ooh, gnarly.
And that's not necessarily it either, right? So there's a kind of a dance between going like, what was like inspiring me in that moment, or like, what was I feeling that made me look that way, or like, what was I trying? And
I want to fall out of this chair that you said that, because that's way too real.
Yeah.
You're either, when you're looking at a photo, an inspiration, a muse of yourself, sometimes you're either running away from it or trying to get back to it.
Yeah.
And it's like, what am I doing?
Right. We don't go back.
Never.
The only way forward is forward.
You got to make it happen in the moment.
Yeah. And it's just like right now. Yeah. Right now.
Yeah.
And it's okay and useful as a tool to pull those feelings in and those sentiments and
Yes.
all of that. But to do it in a way where it's integrated into the here and now, and it's not, I'm chasing a feeling via an external experience of myself or the world.
Well, then we're tying in that whole piece of what you just said about the vulnerability, the unknown. That's like the ultimate moment that you're living in when you're making, let's say, a look. You can't ever get caught up in basically the past or like the fantasy of the future. And that sweet spot is like, I don't know what to say about her. I really don't. It's hard for me to define, because I think doing hair has given me a lot of feelings of editing. I feel like I can edit the moment. And you really don't want to edit it too much. Like if you're feeling the way you're feeling, if you're showing up the way that you are, working with what you've got and creating some generosity inside of that is sort of how I define like a best self in the present moment.
I think that's
for
beautiful.
myself and for others, right?
Totally.
Because it's not just about, you don't get dressed up and to be by yourself. Like, you're usually out with people, or like we are having a conversation. There has to be that interactive space.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think it's such a good point. Man, there's so much here, right? I think it's just being able to be willing. And I say just, like it's so easy, but being able to be willing to be with whatever is while playing in that creative space, and that's so much of creation, is not getting, and this goes to the identity thing too, like not getting fixated on a particular outcome that's rooted in any of what you just said, or manipulation of what is beyond. I mean, of course, like we're manipulating things when we apply makeup and do hair, but like
The ultimate thing, though, is when you're doing all those things is to go out and live your life.
yeah, and it's acceptance. Like I think in beauty, and this was probably one of the things I really struggled the most with when I was doing hair, was myself. And I was, in my early 20s, and I truly didn't know anything about anything. And I was so insecure and so like feeling responsible for my clients' confidence and sense of self and giving them the exact result that they want. And that is not really possible because it's such, there's the science of color and there's technique and there's expertise, but so much of it is also just like doing your best and seeing what happens. And sometimes you so don't get what you think you're going to get, but if you can allow yourself to stay open and not attached to the outcome, you might find out, you might be able to see that it's actually so much freaking better than you would have thought.
Yeah.
And, that's been a big part of my last couple of years. I cut all of my hair off. Like I've gone through a major change and really challenging myself in that way to like look at myself. So when I was 23, I cut my hair pretty short. And this is when I was assisting, and I could not cope like for several years. It f***ed me up. And I mean,
It can do that.
yeah,
It can.
It really, really rocked me. And I hadn't cut my hair short since. And that was like 15 years ago or whatever. And so last year I was like, I'm doing this. This is practical for my life right now. And I'm going through something. My hair was to my waist. I'm like,
It's symbolic.
There's a reason why women cut their hair off
Yes.
at a certain point.
Yes.
Energetically, what all this stuff I'm carrying and like my identity that I'm carrying with this, and really challenging myself. And I cut it short. And every day was a challenge to look at myself in the mirror and find the beauty. It still is. I'm still like, oh, but like also, okay, how does it feel?
Right.
And that's really so much of what it was. Like I went from having, mounds of hair to having hair that air dried in like 5 minutes in the dry California place that I live. Like,
right.
Which was so liberating. So much of it for me has just really become like, how does this feel?
Right. Not so much
Now,
my
how does it look?
self-imposed visions of what I'm supposed to look like. I'm glad that we circled back into some of your experience in hair, because I this is what I live for, to hear. And I want to use this as a pathway back into your transition into cosmetics.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's so much depth there, right? When you started doing hair and your original vision was cosmetics, I'm sure you didn't imagine learning any of that and experiencing those relationships, because those relationships with your clients and those feelings you're describing are so surprising about the job. You have no idea what you're walking into, and then walking out of, because you learn something that I don't know if anyone outside of hairdressing really gets the same experience. If you're out there, come talk to me. I really want to know, because I feel like this is very unique to the job.
Yeah.
So tell me more about that, about, you know, having that like super rich interpersonal like client experience, salons, social political experience, and then how did you get into cosmetics?
Yeah. So first of all, to say that I did not expect that, and I was very ill-equipped to be.
As we all are. I'm kidding.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you have to learn it, right? Like, and some of us more than others probably, but like emotionally, I was a wreck, and I couldn't really provide that. And so, but it was also the emotional support, I should say. So
This is why your hairdresser has like a crystal nearby, because she's like, girl, don't you dare walk in here and say that to me.
so true. So, but and it was also like, oh, I kind of thought dropped for a second. Let me pull it back. What did I say right before the crystal? I
heard
like,
something like beep beep boop bap bap.
I was so
we were
ill-equipped. Like,
yes.
and oh, okay. So it was also, I was ill-equipped, and I crave depth. We all crave depth, right? Like actual connection. And so because of this environment and this world that I was living in at the time, it was all very surface. And that felt terrible. You know, small talk, like sit in my chair and tell me about your day. I had a client who I did his hair every 2 weeks for, I don't know, 6 months. And then one time his girlfriend came with him, and I'm like, where's your wife?
Oh.
Right? And because we just talked about like the surface stuff, and like now I'm like, so tell me about your failing marriage.
Right.
Like,
right.
But I didn't have those skills, or like didn't know that I could do that, or like didn't even think that that was that there was anything deeper in that moment.
And you know, you have to watch the dance of, why am I asking that? Is it him needing the space to talk about it in a non-biased space, and so I allow for that listening, or am I here for the tea?
Totally.
And I think that as a young stylist, you are there for the tea, and you're there to chug it and throw it back like a shot, and then realize I have a hangover.
Yeah, but I also, like, I wasn't there for the tea. Like, my coworkers were, and they were awful. And I was like, I don't want to be like that. And if this is what the industry is going to be like for me, I can't do this. And so
everyone has their phases, and we are so influenced by our salon.
Well, that's it. And I did,
because I don't think
wasn't in the right place.
Well, sometimes you just are where you are, right? And that goes for everyone in the setting.
Totally. And I mean, that's a big part of it. So when I left there, I did go to another salon that was smaller, more privately owned. I felt like I had the skill set that I could actually like do better services, and it was a more creative environment. It was a much better experience.
Right.
But I was still like, I don't want to do this. And I can't see continuing to do this. Something is missing for me. So, and at the time I was going through some big life changes. I left that relationship. I was just like really trying to figure it out. And so you asked me how I got involved in cosmetics. Right?
Yeah, like what was you, because I mean, you've had several transitions. You no longer work in beauty at all.
Yeah.
So you had a transition from one beauty profession to another, and then out of that. And I think, first off, I don't want to let this pass without saying, I think it's interesting how true it is that for any line of work, our personal situation affects the work. And especially for hair, there's a certain theater to the way that you show up that you really, if you really love it, I think that you want to show up in your best, lightest self. And so when you have things happening in your life, it makes that a totally different process. So I have a lot of compassion for understanding that dynamic.
That's so true. So I started freelancing for a at the time, new brand. And
Did they approach you as a hairdresser?
no, I had actually already left doing hair full time. I was working full time at a retail store, like a beauty retail store that sold, shampoos and Dermalogica and
Because hairdressers make the best educators of products.
yes, and
We're trained to do it in the salon.
yeah, and that's really what I mean by like these applicable skills, right? Transferable skills that I learned through this, I could sell. And so I was working there and sort of just like figuring it out. And I was doing hair on the side still, and that worked well because I could very much curate my clientele and say, no. And
Powerful.
yes, I cold emailed this company to say, if you need anybody in this market, I would like a shot. And they emailed me back probably a few months later and said, oh no, it was probably a month later if I'm being clear. We're really having a hard time finding somebody for the market, and we would like you to come and meet our trainer, the executive that's going to be in, and try it out. And I went in and had a blast and sold a ton of product at the Sephora that I was in that day with he became my mentor, and they promoted me, moved me to Chicago, gave me a 35 state territory. I busted my ass. I failed a lot, got burnt out, moved back to Columbus, again, to clean up my personal life. And from there, I left that company, and then I started working at Nordstrom, and I worked behind the counter. I worked for NARS. And then because I was quite good at the people management aspect and the sales and just being in a fast-paced environment, being able to manage lots of things and stay on it, Nordstrom started utilizing me to kind of like fix the counters that were having some issues. So I just, kind of was here at MAC for a little while to boost their sales and kind of help train and support the counter, the team on the counter. And then I'd go to Bobby Brown, and I did that for a little while.
It's these small, soft skills that are so hard to define that end up being so incredibly, part of me wants to say lucrative because it's valuable. They're valuable.
They're beyond valuable, and I think we write them off if we're not conscious of the value. I certainly did for a very long time. It took me, still even 6 or 7 years more to really get to a place. So from Nordstrom, I had a couple more executive positions. I moved to St. Louis for a beat and then was in Minneapolis for years. And I developed a really significant friendship with a hairdresser who is a national trainer for Wella. And she, at the time, was one of the most successful hairdressers around my age, who I felt relatable to, who was having the kind of success that I might have liked to have. And she is the one that really encouraged me as I was expressing, that I wasn't really wanting to continue doing work the way that I was. I had been traveling for almost a decade for work, managing accounts. I didn't really have a home life. I was feeling really unstable in all of that and wanting to make some changes. I'm very entrepreneurial. I wanted to work for myself.
All things that hair gives, right?
Precisely. And I wanted another shot. And I think there's also this element of like, for me, it's also just like a challenge, like almost to a level of masochism, but like I need to be challenged in order to be stimulated and engaged and find that flow. And so Justine was her name. She really encouraged me and showed me how all of these skills that I had, and at the time I was working for a brand that has services as well as their very well-established, well-known, huge product line. And so I was utilizing for the first time since I left doing hair, since I got my cause license, basically, I was utilizing in that role kind of all of those skills. And I was at that intersection of developing service businesses and providing service to clients and being there in that place and selling retail in a way that gave me a little bit more power, gave me a little bit more taste of what I was made of than I'd had previously. And so, yeah, Justine was like, what you're doing for this brand is extremely valuable in this industry, in hair specifically, because these are the soft skills, the interpersonal skills specifically, selling, retailing, booking, clientele, retention, all of these things that come really with, I think, time and intention, practice and intention. But if no one has ever trained you, how do you learn?
Right.
So I then left, I was able to leave that and segue very easily into having my own business, providing those services for the industry. And I did that for several years. And then kind of that naturally segued me into providing brand and business development services for small, or I should say independent, because small isn't really it, but independent businesses beyond beauty, beyond, salon. And I say that I was working with massage therapists and estheticians as well.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like I've lived like a dozen lives since I left, and I'm happy for that. I'm proud of that. I've worked really hard for that. And yeah, when I think about how hard I have worked to get from where I was to where I am, and like, this is not it. Like where I'm at, I'm like, bring it. Like I'm going to continue going. And I also won't say that I've left the industry for good, because I don't know where I'm necessarily going. I still have a heart for it. That's why when you asked me to do this, I was like, hell yeah, I am going to go out of my way today. I was supposed to leave town today, right? So I'm like, yeah, I'll stay another night and I'm going to make it happen, because
thank you for doing
I'm
that.
so passionate about it. Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Well, I thank you for doing that, because I think there's a huge power in owning and exploring a piece of your life for several reasons. One of them, because you can not be doing it and still love it. You can have done it, moved through 5 iterations of what it means in the sense of a job, and go on to do something else.
Yeah.
And it can still have a huge connection. But one part of it, specifically for you at least, that I feel is that as you go on in writing and more of your artistic career, this is a part of your life that, at least on this episode for me, serves as like a capsule of understanding you that you don't necessarily get to express to people. I think if someone who knew you went and watched this, it might answer a lot of questions and have this really special piece of history on this episode. And for other people listening, I think they're getting, so many other things. I think, for actors, I think that there's a weird correlation between beauty and theater, where we both have the same hard-on for like never letting it go.
Yeah.
So I think that someone in like a theatrical world would listen to this and be like, wow, I really relate to feeling like I have to die on this hill.
Yeah.
And I think that someone in a transitionary period or a young person could hear this story and be like, oh, I don't have to die on a hill.
Yeah.
There's no hill to die on.
There's no hill.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then hairdressers, we have a special bond, I feel, if you've been in this world, if you've been in beauty and you've experienced these like relationships, these highs and these lows, and all of the connections of your personal life into your work, etc., that you listen to something like this and you get something very, very peaceful and connected and validated and heard when you hear, you know, someone's story inside and out, because we have a pretty big wisdom for each other.
Yeah.
And it's great. And it's really, honestly, it's a great business. I think it's something that a lot of people are interested in, and you should explore it. It's great to explore.
It will teach you everything that you need to know about yourself, if nothing else. Like, and that, I don't think enough can be said for the value of knowing yourself.
Right. Everyone's trying to be coaches and therapists these days, but go be a hairdresser.
Yeah, that's great. I'm like, yeah. What else can I say? Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.
This was an amazing, this is probably, I don't want to say it because I might say it about every episode, but this one has really like a special place in my heart. And
Yeah.
it's got a little, I'm hearting it, I'm favoriting it. So thank you so much for listening today. And you can follow us at the Beauty Ritual Podcast and me at beauty_ritual. Kelsey, can you let everyone know where they can follow you? Because I jumped in line and I put myself first.
You should do that. On Instagram, I'm Kelsey A. Furlong. Pretty easy to find. You can find me through Eva too.
And we'll see you next time. You'll find us everywhere podcasts are available. And I love you. Bye.
Bye.